What is your earliest memory of money?
Um, it's interesting. We've been blessed with two children, and we have a our son is 10 and our daughter is 8. She just had her first Holy Communion, and that when I mean, she had my dress. We updated my first communion dress. She wore my first communion dress, but just
Wow.
updated, and it I honestly had like a flashback. You know that in that scene, movie Ratatouille, like when he takes a bite and he has a flashback. She's in the dress and opens one of her gifts, and it's a card from my aunt and uncle, and there's money in it. And it was a very generous gift. And I was like, I had this flashback. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my first communion when I was a second grader is when I remember being like, what's all this? Like it's a first like step, at least from that I remember having a large amount of money. And my brother is 2.5 years younger than me, and we ended up going to the same university. And we're out one night at the bar, and people were joking. They're like, Colleen always just brings cash. She pays for himself. My brother's like, Colleen still has first communion money. She's that cheap. Like, and I remember being like, I do. Wait a minute. No, he's right. Because then I would take that money from First Communion and just save it. Looking back, I was a natural saver.
Okay.
And so like I would always have money in my piggy bank. And then as I started babysitting through high school, or even before high school, but like I was 12 years old and taking that Red Cross certification test to be a licensed babysitter. And I've never not had at least $1. I've always had something in the bank.
Mm.
So yeah, long answer there. It was first communion as a second grader.
So that is like what you think back to when you think back to like your earliest memories of money. So from that, how did you then, or where did you learn to save that and kind of like tuck it away, hoard it, make sure you always have something? Do you remember where you learned that?
My mom and dad had such good financial habits
Okay.
that I remember watching my mom at the kitchen table, like going once a month. She would have the statement from the bank and she would have the check ledger out. And I remember, I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, I'm just confirming everything matches up. And it was my mom that handled the finances. And so I was very fortunate. I've never, gone without it as a child or as a teenager and everything. But I also came from a family where it was like, if you are asking us for money, you better have a very good reason.
Mm.
Otherwise, you're going to have to earn that money. Like my mom and dad were not one to like pass out, oh, here, like we'll pay for your hair to be dyed and everything. Like they were like, well, we'll pay for your hair to get cut. But like anything extra, that was always on my tab.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, so it was my mom and dad's example.
Did they like as you saw her, I guess reconciling the books or making sure the checkbook matched? Did she teach you any of what she was doing, or was it just you looking over her shoulder?
It was me looking over her shoulder. It was very much, even to this day, they're both retired. And, we didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about money. It was considered taboo in my family. You're blessed, be grateful, but don't ask questions kind of approach to
Okay.
money.
Okay. So why do you feel you had to develop, or where do you think you developed that sense of having to save? Like, did you see that they were saving as well, or did you knew that your parents had money stashed away? Like, were there conversations?
I didn't know that there was money set aside, but I did know that, my mom went back to teaching full time when I was in middle school. My dad was in manufacturing sales. And so I saw them working hard. I would see my mom bring home those papers. She taught first grade and was a reading teacher. So she was, bringing papers home to grade when we'd go on, weekends away. She would bring the report cards to do while we went and did things. She would stay back at the cabin and she would work. And a lot of that was, the kids are out of the house. She'd get the whole cabin to herself and it was quiet. So she didn't have us bugging her. But it was also, I saw how they were shopping. She would never shop with, like, if we went to JCPenney's, there was always a coupon. We didn't go to the store without a coupon. If she went and splurged on a nice purse, that was a Coach purse for her. We never went to the Coach store at, the mall. We would go to the outlets. And so we were constantly like, okay, like she knew her budget. She would talk about the budget. She would talk about it, but it was never like, let's sit down and teach you what this is. They did so much of this modeling and therefore that was the teaching. That was the form of teaching.
Yeah. So you also were an observant child. Like you clearly, I know kids watch their parents all the time. Mm-hmm. They just absorb and, just gather things from their surroundings. So, okay, they taught you by modeling the correct behaviors with money.
Yeah.
And yes. You have siblings?
My brother. Yes.
Do you think he picked up on that as well?
Yeah. But in such a different way though.
Okay.
Like we were both, like I said, we're 2.5 years apart in age and we were such drastic personalities. And, I was very, like always have to save, have to have a plan, in college, I would have my syllabus ready and making all my flashcards and everything. And my brother would be like, yeah, I probably should buy books. So I'm like, hey, we're halfway through the semester. Yeah, you should buy the books.
And he's like, bought the book.
Yeah, like, what?
What have you been doing this whole time?
Yeah, like he was like, well, I just, and like what he was doing, which was not actually a bad financial decision. He was getting stuff at the library. He was borrowing books from his buddies. Like, I'm like, well, what are you doing with your money? And he was like, well, I got my own. So we don't talk about that.
Was he saving as well, do you think? Yes. Or was he just,
okay. Oh, I know now. Yes, he was saving. And so he had gotten different advice from our grandfather. He was saving up to buy a ring eventually for his future wife.
Did he have one in mind yet? He knew
a wife or a ring?
The wife. Did he know who? Nope. But he knew he was going to get married someday.
The advice he was given was, when you find yourself an amazing woman, you put a ring on that finger.
Wow.
And you don't want to have to save up for it.
Wow. That is hilarious, but also amazing. Like, okay, that's,
I know, right? Like the different information that he was picking up and I was picking up, it's different information.
Yeah. And they say that you could be raised in the same household, but your experiences are so different. But it's amazing how you two took the right path to managing money. Some kids rebel and maybe do their own thing, but, or it's completely opposite, but it's great that, you follow the example and the advice of your elders.
Yeah. And we were fortunate that we had such good advice and good examples.
Yep. Where do you think your parents learned that? I guess from their parents, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was it was my mom and dad. They both grew up in Michigan. My mom was in the Detroit area. My dad was in mid-Michigan. They met in college. But I'm third generation female college graduate. My mom, I to this day thank the Lord, my Nana was very strong. My mom's mom was a very strong, independent woman. And she was the one that went and got a nursing degree right after World War II and was considered, an independent woman for that time frame. Mm-hmm. And so she set a great example for my mom, who then passed it down to me. And I that as the mom of a daughter myself, I know I'm so thankful to be able to carry on that tradition.
Yes. So what is your approach? Are you going to model, or are you going to have actual kind of lessons with your kids?
Oh, we have actual lessons.
Okay.
Like we are talking about it. Like we are using not only like the word budget, but we took the kids to Disneyland. Yes, no, World. I get them confused. We're in World for Florida. So we took the kids to Disney World for spring break. and they had been saving up since January. I'm like, whatever you're like, the souvenirs you're gonna buy, that's on you. I will buy them. We will have matching shirts, one set of matching shirts from Etsy. I'll do that. But I'm not doing the ears. I'm not doing like, if you want to buy it, it's on your dime. And sure enough, we get into the park and our son was like, oh, those are kind of cool. Like those bubble ones. I'm like, oh, okay. They're $32. And he's like, not that cool. Like,
Yep, yep. It's so amazing how life changes once you're paying, right? Once you get out of the house as a, young adult and you're paying those bills, it's like, okay, maybe I'm not afraid of the dark.
yeah, it really is empowering. And so, I remember being in high school and, waitressing and babysitting, doing everything just so I could afford to go, to a basketball camp or anything. But it made me appreciate going to that basketball camp because I knew how many of my cousins I had to babysit. Like how many of them were still in diapers. I'm like, I remember one time I was like, I changed so many diapers to get here. Like I did. And it really didn't make me appreciate it. So I think, I'm taking what I've learned from my own family and, applying that and just continuing to advance this conversation.
Was your first job babysitting?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I was 12. I was the babysitter. My dad's one of 12 kids and he's number 7. So, and they raised my brother and I in the same hometown that my dad and his siblings lived in. So I was babysat by older cousins. And then by the time I was 12, there were plenty of younger cousins for me to babysit. There was never in a weekend I don't remember babysitting somebody.
Wow. How much do you remember getting paid? What were your rates?
I remember charging $2.50 an hour.
Wow. Okay. And so you learned that, okay, I'm trading my time for money to be able to purchase the things and do the things that I want. How much did summer camp cost?
I remember paying, okay, so it was a basketball camp. It was a 1 week. There were these basketball camps called McCracken basketball camps. I don't know if they're still around or not, but we would go and stay at these little colleges in the mid-Michigan area. And at the time it was like $200 for the week. And my mom was like, no, I'm not paying $200. And, so they came up with the compromise. I had to pay $100 to go. So then it's like, okay, I have to babysit. How many hours of babysitting is that? And
did you literally do the math out?
I did. And I think I could do the math now if I wanted to. What is that? Like if it's $5, if it's 4 hours for 10, that's 40 hours.
A whole week work and labor, a whole 40-hour work week.
Yeah, 40 hours worth of babysitting. Now I will say this. I would charge the $2.50 an hour. I usually would get an uncle that would be like, here, just take it. You clean the kitchen. Like there was usually something extra handed in there. And he's like, I don't feel like doing math. I want to get you home and then go home. So, but I babysit. I kept it and I saved it. And then I had to literally hand the money over to my mom.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, that's amazing. Like not a lot of kids. I remember I personally had, a little bit of education in finance and I was a good saver. So when I started making money, I also put away. I just knew that I'd have to be paying for things on my own. So like, if you spend it, you're not going to have it. So I just knew to save. But it's so interesting hearing all this because you shared a part of your story that is kind of opposite. I'm very interested to hear how you got to where you were on your honeymoon night. So what series of events, or was there a turning point in what you learned and had been exercising or just doing as a young adult with your money to then land you where you were, on your honeymoon night? I don't want to get into it just yet, but like, was there a turning point where like those habits kind of flew out the window?
No, not for me.
Okay.
Not for me. I was always very like, okay, there's always, you get paid a chunk goes into the savings. I was always a saver. I felt comfort in the savings. And then when I started to invest and, have a career, and of course you would just contribute to your Roth IRA. And I was a teacher, so I was able to have a 403B. And of course you always were saving for retirement and saving for the future. And then, even when I started working on my master's degree, I've got a master's degree. I'm teaching full time. I ended up working part-time at my apartment complex and paying that off as I went. But I started dating my husband, and we didn't talk about finances. We talked about everything else. I started dating Richard. We were like 24. We were about 24 years old. It was after college. And we didn't talk about finances, but he was working at National Car Rental Agency at Detroit Metro Airport. I was teaching. So we had kind of opposite schedules. So like the time we did spend together, we were like, oh, let's just have fun. And we did. And we go out to dinner, we'd go for bike rides. We were doing a lot of things that didn't cost money because we just didn't have the time. And then, we did decide to get married. He joined the Marine Corps, and we got engaged after that. And I moved after we got married. We're on the honeymoon, and we were together for like the first time in like a chunk of time in over a year and a half. And I was like, I saw him using the credit card. And I'm like, wait a minute, like, why can't we just use the debit card and pay cash? And it led to a fight about money on our honeymoon.
Wow. So, okay. So I guess I misunderstood. So it was the credit card. You didn't realize that his financial astuteness or literacy just wasn't where yours was. And he was just managing his money completely differently than how you manage your money. Okay.
Yep. And because we were engaged and we were living apart, some of these things that probably would have come up during the engagement process as we were planning our wedding and everything, it didn't.
Yeah. So, okay, you see him using the credit card. You're like shocked. You're like, what the heck is going on? Who is this man? Who is this man? Right? Like it completely changes your view of your partner, or just what was going through your mind?
It didn't change my view of him. I still knew he was a great guy. Okay. And but it was just like, what's going on? Like, what? Okay, like we'll figure this out. And, and I knew he had student loans. I knew that there was some debt, but I didn't know the numbers. And that's looking back, and I'm like, why didn't I ask him for those numbers? Why didn't I? And, maybe I was just so excited about getting married. So many different reasons that could have, but the reality was we didn't have these conversations together. And so it wasn't until a couple months into the marriage that I was like, let's sit down and put the numbers on the table. That I was like, oh man, okay. And we were learning how to not only be married together, but we were learning how to live together. I had lived by myself for 4 years and learned, I didn't even have a roommate for 4 years. And so learning how to like live with somebody for the first time, and we're in a completely different state. I'm in Eastern North Carolina. There's not much to do in the area. It's, I'm used to being in the Detroit area. And I'm like, okay, let's go up to the Detroit Institute of Art. Oh, let's go over here to the Eastern Market. Let's do all of these different things I would do in the city. Yeah. And it was like, okay, all right. There was an adjustment period. And and just like many adjustment periods, it was not easy. It was stressful. But at the end of the day, I knew I loved him. I knew he was a good man. And so we just decided like we needed to get on the same page.
So, okay. What kind of, like, when you started learning about your husband's history and like, or just where he was now, like, what can you say was different from what you experienced growing up and what he experienced growing up?
I think we came from different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. We just came from different backgrounds. And so, he didn't, and it's not that neither family was better than the other. They just were different. Right. And so because of those differences, we had to come together, and it was like, okay, he was comfortable with debt. I wasn't comfortable with debt. We had to come together and learn together, what were we going to do? Just because you were raised that way doesn't mean you had to live that way. Just because I was raised that way doesn't mean we have to live that way. What do we want? What do we want for our marriage and we knew we wanted to have kids. So eventually, what do we want for our future children? And yeah, I mean, that takes time. You can't that conversation does not just happen over a cup of coffee. That is several conversations. But at the same time, what I've appreciated is that we always had respect for each other. It was never like one wasn't putting the other one down, and my strengths were his weaknesses and vice versa. It's kind of like, have you ever seen this analogy? And I know you're on a podcast, so for your listeners, do this, put your hands together and look at your fingers. Okay. You have 5 fingers on your hand. How many gaps do you have between?
4.
Yeah, 4 gaps. So think of it as your fingers. You have more strengths than weaknesses. But when you come together, you fill in each other's gaps and weaknesses.
Okay. I like that.
So yeah, we kind of were like, okay. So because I felt comfortable and with the finances and everything, I was like, okay, let's figure out how to pay this debt off because it was causing me stress. And we did it.
So, okay, let's talk about that a little bit. So you see him using the credit card and like you said, you were stressed. This developed a sense of stress within you. Had you ever felt stress about money growing up or?
No, I mean, like I said, I was fortunate that I had such an early opportunity to start saving. So that savings had always been accumulating on top of growing. And so I even, when I remember getting cell phone bills, I'm 40 years old. So I had a cell phone bill when they used to charge you per minute. And there were times like I remember being in college and being like, I can't go out this weekend. I just got my cell phone bill and it's way higher. Like I couldn't, but it was like, okay, so you're not going to go out with your friends this weekend. You're not going to go hang out at the bar. You're not going to go do this. Not the end of the world to catch up with them on Monday. But the money you were going to spend out has to go to the cell phone bill. If that was the biggest stress I had to deal with, I was blessed.
So you felt a firm foundation. When you have your finances in order, it's definitely a feeling of stability, right? It's not just the saying financially stable, like you literally feel stable. So growing up, you always felt stable. So when you, if you don't mind just saying that so that I could use that clip, like how you felt growing up.
Growing up, I always felt stable. When it came to finances, I felt very stable.
Like your family never showed any instance or situation where things were tight, like, because your mom was just so great with money. So you just never felt like you were not okay.
Right.
Okay. So then you see your husband using a credit card and you find out what the situation is. How did you feel then? You said you were a little stressed.
Oh, I was very stressed. Well, we actually put the numbers on the table. And I was not teaching at the time in North Carolina. I was finishing up my master's degree. So I was not bringing in an income. I had money set aside to pay for the master's degree and pay for the internships. But I felt another part of this was it was the first time in my life I wasn't bringing in an income. So I felt stressed about that. And then I saw the amount of debt that we were going to attack together. I was like, I was overwhelmed. It felt like a punch to the gut.
Okay. So, these emotions can sometimes take over us. How did you get your mind maybe you snapped out of it, but how did you then get to, okay, now let's develop a plan to get through this? What was that process like?
It was definitely not a snapping out of it. It was for me, it was, okay, what do we do? Here's the problem. What do we do? What's the solution? And so we started, looking on base and see like, well, what options do we have? Like, because we had heard about like, there were baby boot camps, there were classes if you're just newly married, like, do we have access to anything here? And we did. we had access to it was called Financial Peace Military. It was the Dave Ramsey's program, but geared towards the military. And we were able to take that class on base. And so we went through that process. I didn't, I was like, okay, the budgeting was the main thing that helped us at that point, because that's where we needed the most help. Like, where do we even start? What do we even do? And so we used that plan. There were times that, Richard was like, I don't really agree with it. So we did it kind of like Dave-ish. The credit card, when they were like, you should cut up your credit cards, Richard's like, no, I don't agree with it. And so because, one of us, I was ready to go. I was like, get the scissors out, let's go, and everything. He was like, I don't really know. So we didn't do it. We paid those down and we kept that. But we were able to start to not only get organized and then track our progress. And by tracking the progress, it built up our confidence. And, okay, it was a long journey to do it, but not only was our confidence increased, but we could feel our endurance. We're like, okay, we don't have to, it's not always going to be like this. Eventually we're going to get to go out to eat. But right now, this is the goal that we have. We want to pay off this, then this, then this. And it helped us stay focused.
What progress did you see you were making? Like, were the debts decreasing? Were the savings increasing? Like, both of them? What did you focus on first?
So because of that plan at the time, we were like, all right, we just need $1,000 in our savings account. But we did see the debt start to decrease. And then I became pregnant. And I was like, I don't think $1,000 is enough for a baby. It wasn't. And so we kind of continued to pay the minimum payments, but then put more towards the savings account. And we're very strategic with that baby registry with our family back in Michigan. And I learned a lot about just, what can you buy used? What do you like? How many clothes does a baby really need? Not money. Not many.
So as it sounded like you did a lot of compromise, because you guys were on the same page, even with how to get yourself out of or into a better financial situation. Mm-hmm. So how can you share a little bit about how you went on navigating, like, compromising with your spouse and being okay with, okay, I guess we'll keep the credit cards, and the program says we should cut it up, but I guess we'll keep them.
Yeah. It was, so we definitely just took it like one paycheck at a time. And especially, when the baby came and then a car broke down, and, we made the choice as brand new parents of like, we need a minivan. Yeah, we need a minivan. It's a brand new baby. We have a little itty bitty dog. We didn't do it like the complete, I wouldn't say that we, were perfect students of paying off the debt. We made choices looking back, and I was like, that didn't really need to be made, but it was made and we handled it. And so I think that was a big thing that we learned, was the flexibility. As we were going through and paying off the debts, it was like, we do ultimately get to tell our money what to do. And when we were paying them off and everything, I mean, we paid off $60,000 of debt in 2 years, but I learned some bad habits, and there were times that we had to pause that. So, my husband was deployed during that time, and he had a minor stroke when he was deployed. And I get the phone call with our baby at the time from Afghanistan, and like, this is the situation. And so obviously that's a time when you pause all your debt payments. But because I knew where the money was, and I knew what, how to shift funds around in the budget, that was one less stressor I had to deal with during a very stressful time. And so the flexibility, we were learning how to, do it at our own pace. And that really was the biggest, like, the life experiences. The life experiences helped us finally reach that goal of paying it off, and then going on to what do we want to do next.
So you shared that it was the financial piece, military, that really helped get you guys on track. Did you ever feel like you had to call a parent or someone you know, a family or friend, to help you or guide you a little bit at all?
I think there were times when we would ask like our families, like, well, what did you guys do? Like when it came to retirement, like, what did you do? And sometimes family members wanted to talk about it, other times they didn't. And I, but at that point, it was also unique being that we were so far away from family. I mean, it was maybe like a 14-hour drive. So if we did see people and there wasn't, you know, people weren't using Zoom. I don't remember using FaceTime, Skype. I remember people using Skype. So like I couldn't have access to having a face-to-face conversation with someone back in 2011 was different than it was, you know, now. So we really learned how to lean on each other, the two of us. And then, you know, when we did, you know, finally pay it off, you know, I remember, you know, talking to my mom and dad about it. Like, oh yeah, we did this. They're like, that's awesome. They were really excited for us.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you know, after that was done, you had to think of what was next. So what were the next kind of goals you guys had?
So we paid off the last debt, the last loan in November of 2013. And I already knew I was pregnant with our second. And then we received orders overseas. We went to Japan. So at that point, it was a lot of like, okay, let's just save it up an emergency fund. What we had learned about moving overseas was that you're going to have to pay for a car because there's the two of you. You're probably going to want to buy two vehicles, and you paid cash for those, but they were like $3,000, maybe $2,000 a piece. So we knew we needed to have that money set aside. The expenses of moving, all of that stuff, it can add up quickly for the military families. So that was the goal. That was the next goal. Like, let's save as much as we can so that when we get over there, we can pay for these items that we're going to need immediately. And then when we got over there, it was just, okay, let's get settled, welcome the baby, and then just kind of going through life with a baby and a toddler. I can laugh now, but I was exhausted.
I could believe it.
And Richard was working, and then he, you know, those were the goals though. Like, so we, you know, we saved up for the down, you know, to buy the cars and everything when we got over there. It wasn't really until we got to Japan that Richard was the first one to say like, okay, you know, we can go out to eat now. We can, like, it's no longer like, oh my gosh, we have to do so much in such a short amount of time. He was like, Claire's here. Let's breathe. Let's go enjoy Japan. Like, how often do you get to live in Japan? And it took me a good couple of years to really get to that same, like, okay, let's breathe. We will still pay off, you know, we'll still save an emergency fund. We're eventually going to put money aside for the down payment of a house someday. Buying a house over in Japan was never an option. So we had the luxury of time, just kind of like, okay, we'll have the down payment eventually. Let's appreciate this area that we're in. Because it's amazing.
I could believe it. I know, like meeting all these, you know, military veterans or even active duty, and you guys are like, oh yeah, I live here. I'm like, oh my God, how cool. Yeah, you guys have like amazing experiences with, I'm sure not like the having to move all the time, but you know, just being stationed in really unique places, unique compared to us, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity, but at the same time, there are things though that make it challenging because of social media now. Now I would see all the baby showers and, you know, weddings and everything that we missed from our family and friends back stateside. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn to find a balance. Like, okay, maybe I'm not on social media that much because I want to appreciate where we're at. Because you're right. It's amazing. Okinawa was amazing to be at. And so I again, balance, just trying to find where, you know, I'm not going to waste this opportunity, but I also don't need to be YOLO.
Yeah. So it sounds like you definitely have a more fluid frame of mind when it comes to managing your money. It's not like, you are sticking no dollar over, like you're not spending a dollar over. Like that's not the kind of limitations you put on
Yeah.
yourself. Okay.
Yeah. It's, when we look at the budget now, it's like, okay, well, where did this money go? Like what, just knowing where it's going. And then what is the plan? Groceries right now are just so hard to budget for a family of four, especially with the kids being 10 and 8. I feel like I just went grocery shopping. You guys are still eating, like which is a blessing. We prayed for them to be happy and healthy and growing, and they are. And so now it's like, okay, how do you're constantly adjusting for things like that in the budget.
Yeah. 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 And you have to be flexible. Like life is not just the straight and narrow path. Things will come up, just the most random experiences, and that may throw you off. And it just sounded like, it was amazing how you were raised one way and you connected with someone who was completely different than you. A lot of people would have bailed, not dealing with this, I'm leaving, but obviously love kept you together, but also you knew what to do. And, you were willing to help your partner to create this life that you wanted together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, and he's helped me in so many things with so many, my way, I'd be able to just be like, I'll never leave the house. I'll have people come here. And he's like, no, let's get out. Let's go and do something. And so because of him, I've been able to go, and it's not just like explore these different duty stations, but he's the one that's like, all right, spring break, we're not wasting this. Let's go do something. I'm like, okay. And I'm so grateful we have.
Yeah. So you kind of balance each other out. Like you're okay with not doing all the things, and
right.
And he wants to do some things. So
right. He's like, if we pack enough snacks, we can just do this. We'll just pack enough snacks. And I'm like, okay, here we go.
Yeah. So you've just been able to build a life together. So would you say you guys are more or less on the same page now with things?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
There's always going to be, there will be times when we're going to disagree. We have to agree to disagree on some things. But I knew when I was dating him that we were on the same page for so many aspects. That and I just, love kept us together, but it was also, he appreciated me for who I was. And I appreciated him for who he was, and nobody's perfect. And so these are the challenges, by going and attacking the financial challenges together, it taught us how to attack other challenges that did come up down the way. So, all right, we learned how to disagree and how to do it in a respectful way, which I valued so much.
Yeah. So, a lot of people experience, disagreements or just issues around money in their marriages. So, I heard you say you respected each other, which is key. Is there any other type of advice you'd share as to couples who are navigating this, who might, realize on their honeymoon night that, oh my goodness, my husband and I are so different, or we didn't get a chance to talk about it, like all these realizations you had. So any advice you could share?
Yeah, what helped Richard and I was we identified our goal. Like, what did we want to work towards? Because it's not always fun to have a budget. It's not always fun. I when I work with my financial coaching clients now, I tell them, I'm like, it can be hard. But ultimately, what is your goal? Why? Find that why. Why are you putting in this time? Why are you updating it once a week? Why are you tracking this? And if you can find a why that you're both working towards, it's going to make it a lot easier.
Thank you so much, Colleen.
You're welcome, Melissa.